The Artist, Months of Ice, Year 2. Ms. Bada walked along the row of students. Previously, there had been rows. Life in the yards moved all too quickly. For some reason, Zhao was certain that there had still been more students than simply himself, but for those same reasons, the rest of the seats present seemed to have been taken up by a collection of oddly realistic figurines that looked for all intents and purposes like other kids, but...
Zhao? Are you awake?
He shook his head, trying to remember if that was the right answer.
You need to listen very carefully.
The ground under his feet began to evaporate, and so did his feet. It shouldn't have hurt, because in some part of his mind he knew it to be a dream, but it did hurt. It hurt with a pain that he hadn't felt in his waking life. It's the burns. A calm, rational voice informed him from some recess of his mind. You cannot keep affording to pretend they don't exist. When you close your mind, we'll come back, with abscesses and sores and little pockmarks that'll make disease like this seem a welcome respite. Falling through the floor, he found himself on a pile of blank recycled paper, the kind that was everywhere in the yards, one of the few perks for those who actually wanted to make something, not that there were that many around to see it. The papers were comforting, even if his entire skin felt like it was at once itching and burning. Was it cold? Was it the cold that was burning? Zhao shivered, and fought back the urge to scratch. Even if this was a dream, that seemed unwise. Besides, he had gotten better. He knew this, remembered recovering after the two strangers had visited, the first two people to really visit their town, and knew that just Zambi's usual affections shouldn't have caused all this. Even if the cold had gotten worse, which it hadn't.
Hey, there. You seem to be in a bit of a pickle.
The voice was oddly familiar, though he couldn't remember where he had heard it before. It seemed to come from something at the corner of his eyes, something bright and blue and painful to look at for too long, something that darted from page to page when he dared to look down at the paper beneath him.
Let's make this quick, because interfering directly has never been my style. You're in a bad way. Really bad.
Zhao whispered, knowing that he was mumbling something in reality, something awake, that people could hear.
Really bad. And it's not because you're a good friend, or because of the cold, or even because you drank too much nettle tea.
The voice seemed very amused with itself, though only for a second.
No. These dreams are important. You're not the only one who has them, of course. Everyone does. You just pay more attention than most.
Suddenly, the paper wound up around his waist and tore it apart, but he felt no pain, instead, falling forward into a calming, warm sea.
I'm not going to fail them, am I? That's up to you. When you get the chance to wake up, think about it. Don't be rash. I can't promise that the right decision is what you really want, ahaha.
And then the voice was quiet, and Zhao was drifting against what he felt was water, as warm as the ice they'd melt over the fire to drink for tea. He was whole once again, but his vision seemed oddly cloudy at the edges, as if someone had scrubbed his eyes with a grey oil pastel. He could vaguely make out Bones and Zambi at either side. Bones was drifting along quietly, occasionally shooting him a concerned glance. The skeleton was buffeted around by the currents, but didn't seem to care too much, being used to such harsh treatment, and not only from nature.
Bones? Are you okay? I'm almost always acceptable, but I suppose what you should really be asking is, are you, yourself?
Replying cryptically at first, Bones gave a creaky, gentle smile, for even in dreams, he couldn't help but be helpful.
Sorry, Zhao. I do not mean to be cloying, only that compared to you right now, you shouldn't be worrying about me. Oh, my. I just feel as if everything has been going so good, only to come crashing down against us. Don't you?
Nodding, Zhao tried to speak, and water filled his lungs, intruding through his nostrils, his lips, his ears. Bones gasped and lunged forward, clumsily, but successfully, forcing the water back out. Barely. Gasping for breath, Zhao coughed up water as Bones held him close, and shook his head, sorrowfully.
Don't cling, when the time comes, Zhao. If you remember nothing else, remember this. I won't forget. I promise.
Zhao murmured, but Bones was already long gone, and once more Zhao found himself alone amongst the waves, almost alone, that was. For some reason, a sense of dread even greater than the water that still stung his throat was present. He did not want to look to his left, but there was no choice. Zambi floated a little above the water, scrunched down with her knees up against her face and her arms wrapped around them. She shot him a tiny little smile.
Hey, Zhao. Hey, Zams.
The two stared at one another, and Zhao felt for the first time how short she was, perhaps mostly because of her terrible posture, but all the same. She felt small, and somehow, he felt that her representation in his mind's eye should feel bigger, more tall. Less frightened.
Worryin' that I've got symmetrical roots.
See? She gestured to the leaves of her hair, trying to smile, maybe at the pun, maybe at something else. But the look on her face didn't change, nor stray from him.
Bro, Zhao.
Despite the fact he was reaching across the tides, his arm wasn't quite long enough and the currents only grew more and more threatening. She looked incredibly sad, but there was nothing he could do.
You've got to remember, promise me. Never let go, okay? Of course. Yeah, I promise.
His tears mixed with the water, but Zambi was already gone. He wanted to believe she had smiled before she did. But then again, this was all in his head, anyway. Right? Another spasm of pain shot through his body. It wasn't from the dream-exacerbated and embellished sores, either. It felt as if someone was holding a shock rod to his spine, like the rumors he had heard of what they did to people who tried to leave the yards with stolen goods or food. The water turned to sludge, and Zhao dipped his hand into it almost without thinking. The tarry brine stuck to his fingers, and felt almost pleasant. He pressed his hand to his face, and some part of his mind began to whisper. You could paint with this. But the idea seemed horrific, and he stopped himself before he could investigate the substance any further. Thankfully, the sky below opened up and threw him into the caverns above. They were entirely too warm, but that was acceptable. It'd be better to burn to death than to freeze, he had decided a long time ago. Except, that wasn't what he had decided. Slowly, the malaise began to peel away, and Zhao could feel full control of his mind returning. The dream was still here, if it was even a dream, but it felt almost as if it were peeling away around him, leaving his consciousness in its wake. The caverns were warm, and he knew that something important was here. Digging through the wall with his bare hands, even when they bled, even after he could not feel them anymore, Zhao finally felt it, pulling from the wall something tiny and cold and made of a material that did not seem to be metal, but almost reminded him of the harsh gemstone they used for security lasers, back home, wherever that was. It was cool to the touch, and he didn't like the feel of it, so he placed it back in the cavern walls, and was content when the rod disappeared with a soft noise like a slurping of stone. Suddenly, it was all around him, the all-encompassing feeling of being home. Of scavenged flour and fresh-baked nothing pie, so called for its ability to still tempt the taste buds even without any filling save slightly doughier crust. The last music to die before people gave up and tried to sleep through the constant sounds of combat around them. Of the friends who had looked up to him, now almost certainly gone. Of the people who hadn't known him, but depended on his return, now certainly gone. Of whatever family he might have had. Gone. He couldn't tell if he was crying or not, but he was shaking and then. The crack of his head as it hit hers made an awful plunk noise, and also aggravated his already sore frame. Having not gotten up in days, he could feel the protest as he tried to take in the light and figure out what, exactly, was going on. Weights against his shoulder, bones, and leg, Zambi, made him aware that his friends were alive, and glad to see him, but...
Ow!
The young woman rubbing her forehead and looking slightly disheartened at him was unfamiliar. No. He felt he had seen her, once before, in the face of a woman leaving with a look of loss and dejection he could not have captured if he had tried to.
I never thought my first act of complete magic'd go quite like this.
She was definitely a human, and more to the point.
Thanks. For saving my life, I think. I'm sorry I headbutt you.
Zhao mumbled, trying his best not to look too embarrassed. What, exactly, do you say to someone who may have just saved your life and whom you just repaid with physical violence, anyway? But fortunately, the young woman seemed to be miles away, her expression of slight pain fading to a wide, stunned smile as she looked upwards and began murmuring to herself. As the cavern light faded back into view, phosphorescent and beautiful, he was keenly aware of how little he hurt, and how he could not remember whatever had caused his sickness in the first place.
Chaaao. That was too much, don't do that again. Okay.
Zambi began, but then went quiet. She looked like she wanted to say more. A lot more. But then again, hadn't it been just recently that she had been ill from the cold? Only, the weirdest thing was that he didn't feel as if he had been ill at all. Bones was talking excitedly now, explaining how the young woman was a witch, and had used her powerful magic to save his life, but something didn't quite add up, and Zhao began to feel incredibly uneasy.
As you should.
Floating in the air above him was a squat, green woman with greasy black hair and an utterly foul expression.
You're not still fully over it yet. I would not have had my apprentice deign to waste her time plucking fools from their dreams, but I suspect they are not entirely your own, so I shall allow this one time a pass.
Cautiously, Zhao reached out and felt Bones' hand. It was cold, and motionless.
Pay attention. I am currently elsewhere and do not have the time nor desire to repeat myself to a minging daydreamer whose night dreams turned out to be far more dangerous.
Snapping irritably, the floating figure ground her impressive teeth against one another.
You will come into your own talent, soon. Suffering is usually the key for such things. Do not.
But the warnings of the old, wizened woman faded as she did, and Zhao felt the flow of his blood returning to normal. All the sensations of the cavern village, the crackling fires, the faint smell of dust and fungus, the distant rustle of someone rolling around in one of the village beds, all brought with them a sense of normalcy.
So, Zhao, bro, this is Lorelei, who is a total lady bro and the witch that saved you. And that guy over there is Dennis, who I actually know I met once. He got all the cheese crunchets and I was miffed, but that's water under the bridge.
Zambi slapped him on the back, and Zhao noticed it didn't even sting. At the moment. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not, but he could see the look of surprise on her face when he didn't reflexively recoil, or even twitch. It wasn't the worst expression, he conceded mildly to himself.
Lorelei, hey? Thanks a million for not letting me die. I don't know what happened. Well, no. You saved my life, so, honest. I think I've got a clue what happened, but it doesn't make sense just yet.
Shrugging, Zhao offered Lorelei a grin. She returned it rather shyly, and he hoped he wasn't staring at her wheelchair.
That's fine. A lot of stuff that goes on doesn't make sense until you can really sit down and examine it. To be honest, I didn't really think that I was going to be able to pull you back. There was something else there, something strange. But I could kind of hear the energy of everyone in the room, for a brief second, and then I kind of focused on yours, and then...
Her smile was very soft, managing to seem both very proud and entirely humble at the same time.
Aha, I'm still a little giddy. I just kind of wish my mentor could have seen me. Call it a hunch. Well, never mind that. So, did you two come to rest here?
The young woman exchanged glances with the writhing bed in one of the houses they had thrown together. Slowly, something rose from it, sunglasses somehow doing nothing to stop Dennis from knowing precisely where to glance. All the mirth drained from Lorelei's expression, replaced with a solid determination.
Sorry. No. We're going to the jungle shrine, and although I was glad to help you out here, what we're doing is very important.
Her eyes widening to the size of dinner plates, Lorelei rolled backwards, stumbling a little over one of the few jets of rock not yet flattened.
I might even have wasted too much time here. I'm sorry, but we can't stay a moment longer.
Bones shook his head, looking distraught.
We really would like to properly thank you. After all, getting guests is pleasant enough, but guests that actually lend their time and service in saving the lives of those they don't even know.
Lorelei's expression hardened. It was a peculiar thing, because just moments ago she had had the look of someone who had found the very first piece of music that had ever spoken to them, and now, her lips were set in a hard line.
No. Dennis, we've got to go. Do you think you're rested up?
Yawning, Dennis pulled himself to his feet, tiny wings beating and grumbling all the while. Pushing her hair out of her face, Lorelei offered them all a brief, retreating smile, and then she left so quickly that it took him Dennis's retreating shape to realize they were well and truly gone. Leaning back in his own bed, Zhao sighed and stared at his fingers, trying to remember what the phantasms in his dreams had whispered.
Hey. Zhao. Are you really okay?
Zambi whispered, as the quiet returned.
More than that, I think. Thanks, Zams. Was it something you did, or ate? It wasn't any of my cooking, or Zambi's weird herbs, was it? Hey. My herbs are really great and stuff. They keep life limber and relaxed, like me. I don't think it was either of you, or the cold. I think I have the weirdest feeling like someone tampered with me, if that makes sense. Like.
Zhao sighed, and ran his fingers through his hair. It felt slightly sweaty, but he didn't really feel the sweat anymore. Everything felt somewhat distant, and that worried him, too.
Like, I was meant to see something, and pass it on. At once I feel kind of used, and kind of terrified. Did Lorelei say where she was going?
Bones knit his fingers together, voice doing nothing to hide his concern.
Just a moment ago, Zhao. She said she was going to the jungle. I really don't think she should.
Trying to stumble to his feet, Zhao instead settled for simply stumbling, crashing forwards into the waiting arms of Zambi. Once again, he prepared himself for the rough, blistering rush of her touch, but nothing came. He couldn't see the welts forming up, at least not yet, and though his immediate reaction was a smile, something about it all felt terribly wrong. Even if the lingering hug went a long way towards making it feel significantly less wrong. Propping himself under Zhao's right arm, Bones and Zambi soon had him up on his feet, and Zhao felt strange. Better than he had before he arrived, almost.
You seem oddly light, if I may say so.
Bones murmured, trying to sound less confused than the old skeleton felt, but whether it was because of a lost memory toying at the edge of his skull, or mere uncertainty was yet to be known, for the witch and her assistant were not the only guests they were to have, that evening. From outside, they could hear the distant sound of distorted trumpets and horns, so loud and unpleasant that even Zambi, who had a high tolerance for this sort of thing, began to wince.
Here, yeah, residents of this cavernous place. We've come seeking the Dark Lord, and know he was seen residing here. It is far too terribly cold for demonkind out here, so we shall be seeking shelter in your warrens.
And indeed, outside a host of demons milled, frostbitten and exhausted, the ice had begun to break off and fragment, sweeping through the air in large, translucent, beautiful, and deadly chunks. The months of howling had arrived. Chapter end.